The familiar silence of my house had become a companion of sorts. Not a welcome one, but one I'd learned to live with. It had been 2 years since Frank passed, and the rhythms of my life, at 72, had settled into a predictable, if lonely, cadence. Mornings were for coffee and the crossword, afternoons for tending to my rose bushes, and evenings for reruns of old shows that Frank and I used to watch together. My son, David, called every Sunday without fail, his voice a warm, steady anchor from his life in Seattle, a world away from my quiet existence in a sleepy Colorado suburb. It was a Tuesday, I remember. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The sky was that particular shade of crystalline blue you only seem to get in early autumn. I was in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean, when the doorbell rang. It was an alien sound in the middle of the day. Salespeople rarely came by, and my friends always called first. I tucked a stray strand of gray hair behind my ear and smoothed my apron, making my way to the front door. Through the peephole, I saw a young man, maybe in his early 20s, standing on my porch. He had a worn backpack slung over one shoulder and was shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. He looked tired. There was something vaguely familiar in the slope of his shoulders, the way he held his head. Cautiously, I opened the door, leaving the screen door locked between us. "Can I help you?" His eyes, a startlingly bright blue, met mine. They were full of a nervous energy that put me on edge. "Hi," he said, his voice softer than I expected. "Are you Eleanor?" "I am. And who are you?" He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "My name is Jake. Jake Miller." The name meant nothing to me. I shook my head slightly. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met." "We haven't," he said, his gaze dropping for a moment before returning to mine with renewed intensity. "But, I think you knew my father. David Miller." The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. David, my David, this boy, this stranger on my porch, was claiming to be my son's son. My grandson. It was impossible. A cold dread, mixed with a wild, impossible hope, clenched in my chest. David had never mentioned a child. Not a word. He was a successful architect, perpetually single, always traveling. The idea was ludicrous. "I think you're mistaken," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "My son doesn't have any children." Jake's shoulders slumped. He looked so young, so vulnerable standing there. "I know this is a huge shock. I found some old letters, and my birth certificate. My mom, her name was Chloe. She never told him. She said she tried, but he'd moved away by the time she knew for sure, and she was scared." Chloe. The name was a ghost from the past. David's high school sweetheart. A sweet, artistic girl with fiery red hair. Their relationship had been intense but short-lived, ending when David left for college on the East Coast. It had broken her heart, I remembered. And him, too, for a little while. My mind was racing, connecting dots that felt both terrifying and plausible. The timeline, it could fit. David graduating, Chloe staying here, it could fit. "Why now?" I asked, my hand gripping the doorframe. "Why are you here now, after all this time?" "My mom passed away 6 months ago," he said, his voice cracking just a little. "Ovarian cancer. It was just the two of us. After she was gone, I was going through her things, and I found a box. There were pictures of her and David, and the letters he wrote her from college. And there was your address, on an old Christmas card. She'd kept it all these years." He swallowed hard. I didn't know what else to do. "I have no other family." The raw honesty in his words broke through the last of my defenses. This wasn't a scam. The pain in his eyes was too real, the story too specific, too messy to be invented. With a trembling hand, I unlatched the screen door. "You'd better come in," I said. He stepped into my foyer, and the reality of the situation crashed over me. This tall, lanky young man with my son's blue eyes and a hint of Chloe's freckles across his nose was standing in my house. My potential grandson. I led him to the kitchen and gestured for him to sit at the table. "Can I get you something?" "Water. A soda." "Water would be great, thank you," he said, setting his backpack down carefully. As I filled a glass from the tap, my hands were shaking so badly I sloshed water onto the floor. I mopped it up with a towel, my mind a whirlwind. What did this mean? Why hadn't David known? Why had Chloe kept this a secret? A surge of anger towards her, a woman I hadn't seen in over 2 decades, flared within me. She had robbed me of this. She had robbed David of this. I placed the glass in front of him and sat down opposite, folding my hands on the table to steady them. "Start from the beginning, Jake. Please." And so he did. He told me about his life with Chloe in a small town in Oregon. He described her as a wonderful mother, creative and kind, but also sad, carrying a weight he never fully understood until he found that box. He told me about her illness, about caring for her in her final months, about the profound loneliness that followed her death. He was adrift, he said, a boat with its mooring cut. Finding that connection to a past, to a potential family, felt like a lifeline. He pulled a worn, yellowed photograph from his wallet and slid it across the table. It was David and Chloe, their arms wrapped around each other, laughing into the camera. They looked so young, so impossibly happy. It was a David the first hadn't thought about in years, the boy before he became the man. I look like him, don't I? Jake asked quietly. Around the eyes, I admitted, my throat tight. You have his eyes. We talked for what felt like hours. I learned he was 22, a graduate in graphic design, working freelance jobs while he figured out his next move. He was soft-spoken, polite, and there was a deep-seated sadness in him that echoed the loneliness I felt in myself. The initial shock was slowly giving way to a dawning, terrifying wonder. Then came the hard part. The phone call. Jake, I said, my voice gentle. We have to call your father. We have to tell David. Panic flashed in his eyes. What if he doesn't believe me? What if he's angry? He'll believe you, I said, with more conviction than I felt. And whatever he feels, he has a right to know. We'll do it together. I brought the cordless phone to the table, my finger hovering over the speed dial button for David's number. I took a deep, steadying breath and pressed it. The phone rang once, twice. Hey, Mom, David's cheerful voice filled the line. This is a nice surprise. Everything okay, David? I began, my voice trembling. I'm fine, I'm here at the house. But, there's someone here with me. Oh, who's that? Did Marjorie from next door finally rope you into another one of her bridge tournaments? He joked. No, honey, it's a young man. His name is Jake Miller. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Okay, should I know that name? I looked at Jake, who was watching me with wide, anxious eyes. David, he says he's your son. The silence that followed was absolute and heavy. I could practically feel his confusion radiating through the phone. What? Mom, what are you talking about? That's impossible. He's here, David. He's 22. His mother was Chloe. The name landed like a thunderclap. I heard David's sharp intake of breath. Chloe. Mom, that was a lifetime ago. This has to be a mistake. Or some kind of scam. Are you sure you're okay? Did you give him any money? It's not a scam, David, I said, my voice firming. I've seen the pictures. I've talked to him. He has your eyes. He has Chloe's freckles. He looks like you did at that age. He's real. Put him on the phone, David said, his voice suddenly hard, all trace of humor gone. I handed the phone to Jake. He wants to talk to you. Jake took the phone as if it were a live wire. Hello, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I couldn't hear David's side of the conversation, but I could see the effect it had on Jake. His face paled, and he flinched as if struck. He stammered, trying to explain about the box, about his mother, about the birth certificate that listed David Miller as the father. She said she was scared, she didn't know how to find you after you moved, Jake's voice broke. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to just show up like this. He listened for another minute, his expression crumbling, then silently handed the phone back to me, tears welling in his eyes. Mom, David's voice was strained, tight with a mixture of fury and disbelief. This is insane. I don't know who this kid is, but he's not my son. Chloe never said a word. Not one word. You need to be careful. This is how these things start. He's probably after something. David, he's not after anything, I insisted, a protective instinct I didn't know I possessed flaring up. He's a boy who just lost his mother and has nowhere else to go. I'm booking a flight, David said abruptly. I'll be there tomorrow. Don't do anything until I get there. Just, be careful. The line went dead. I set the phone down, my heart aching for both of them, for David, whose entire world had just been upended, and for Jake, who had just been rejected by the father he'd traveled so far to find. He doesn't believe me, Jake said flatly, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He's in shock, I said, reaching across the table and placing my hand over his. It was a gesture that felt both strange and natural. Give him time. This is a lot for anyone to process. I looked at this lost boy in my kitchen, this piece of my son I never knew existed, and I made a decision. You'll stay here tonight, I said. It wasn't a question. I showed him to the guest room, the one that had been David's old room. It was frozen in time, a museum of my son's adolescence. Sports trophies, model airplanes, a faded poster of a band I couldn't remember the name of. Jake looked around, a strange expression on his face, part awe, part sorrow. This was his room, he asked. It was, I said. A long time ago. I made up the bed with fresh linens, the mundane task a stark contrast to the surreal nature of the day. I gave him a towel and showed him where the bathroom was. The ordinary rhythms of hospitality felt like a life raft in a stormy sea of emotion. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the day's events. The doorbell, the familiar blue eyes, the name Chloe, David's angry, frightened voice on the phone. It felt like a dream, a strange, poignant dream from which I was afraid to wake up. The next day was a tense waiting game. Jake stayed in his room for most of the morning, and I didn't disturb him. I busied myself with cleaning, baking a coffee cake, a nervous habit, and trying to read the newspaper, though the words swam before my eyes. David's flight was due to arrive at 2. By 1 o'clock, the air in the house was thick with anticipation. Jake emerged from the guest room, looking like he hadn't slept either. We sat in the living room, making stilted, awkward conversation about the weather, about my rose bushes, about anything except the elephant in the room. Finally, at 3:15, a rental car pulled into the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I saw David get out, his posture rigid. He was still in his business attire, a sharp contrast to the casual quiet of our street. I opened the door before he could ring the bell. He looked older, the lines on his face etched deeper by stress and a sleepless night. He pulled me into a quick, hard hug. Are you okay? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I'm fine, David, come in. He stepped inside and saw Jake, who had risen nervously from the sofa. The two of them stood there, about 10 feet apart, just staring at each other. It was one of the most profound and painful moments of my life. Seeing them side by side, the resemblance was undeniable. It was in the shape of their jaw, the set of their mouths, the identical shade of their blue eyes. It was like looking at David from 20 years ago. David's angry resolve seemed to waver. He blinked, his gaze taking in every detail of Jake's face. Hi, Jake said, his voice small. David didn't speak for a long moment. He just stared. Then, he walked slowly toward the sofa and sat down heavily, his eyes never leaving Jake. Show me, he said, his voice hoarse. Show me what you have. Jake knelt by his backpack and pulled out a small, cardboard box. He brought it over and placed it on the coffee table in front of David. With trembling hands, he took out the contents. The photograph of him and Chloe. A stack of letters tied with a ribbon. And finally, a certified copy of a birth certificate. David picked up the birth certificate first. His name was there, clear as day, Father, David Allen Miller. His face went ashen. He picked up the photograph, his thumb gently stroking the image of Chloe's laughing face. A wave of emotion passed over his features, grief, nostalgia, anger. He untied the ribbon and opened one of the letters. I saw his eyes scan the page, his own youthful handwriting a relic of a past life. He read another, and then another. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. She never told me, he whispered, the anger gone, replaced by a devastating sorrow. All this time, I had a son, and she never told me. He looked at Jake, truly looked at him, and I saw the moment the wall came down. The moment belief, however painful, finally took root. I'm so sorry, David said, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. Jake's composure broke then, and he began to cry, silent tears of relief and grief. It's okay, he managed to say. It wasn't your fault. David stood up, crossed the room, and pulled Jake into a clumsy, desperate hug. They stood there in my living room, father and son, holding on to each other as if their lives depended on it, mourning 22 lost years. I cried too, tears of sadness for all that had been lost, and tears of a shaky, burgeoning joy for what had just been found. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of conversation, of questions and answers, of shared grief and tentative connection. David wanted to know everything, about Jake's childhood, about Chloe, about her illness. Jake, eager to share the weight of his history, told him everything. David stayed for a week. It was a week of emotional whiplash, moments of incredible joy, like when David showed Jake his old baseball glove, mixed with moments of profound sadness as they pieced together the story of what might have been. We ate meals together, the three of us, the silence at the dinner table now filled with conversation and the strange, new sound of a family being built from the wreckage of the past. One evening, David turned to me, his expression serious. "Mom, I want to do a DNA test." I was taken aback. "David, after everything, do you really need to?" "It's not that I don't believe him," he said, looking at Jake, who was watching us from the armchair. "I do. I feel it. But I think, for closure. For both of us. To have it official, in black and white. So there's never a shadow of a doubt." Jake nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll do it." They went to a clinic the next day. The wait for the results was agonizing, a week of suspended animation. But when the email finally arrived, it was nothing more than a formality. The results confirmed what our hearts already knew. David Miller was 99.9% likely to be the father of Jake Miller. David had to return to Seattle, to his job and his life. But this time, he didn't leave alone. "I have a spare room," he told Jake one morning over breakfast. "It's got a great view of the Space Needle. I was thinking, maybe you'd like to come back with me. For a while, we have a lot of time to make up for." The look of hope on Jake's face was brighter than the morning sun. "Really? I'd like that." The day they left was bittersweet. I hugged my son goodbye, then I turned to Jake. I pulled him into a tight embrace. "You take care of yourself," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And you take care of each other." "I will, Grandma," he said. The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. Grandma. I was a grandma. The title I thought I'd never have was now mine. They drove away, and the house was quiet again. But the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes of their laughter, with the ghost of their presence, with the promise of the future. That was 6 months ago. The story doesn't have a fairy tale ending, because it's not an ending at all. It's a beginning. David and Jake are navigating their new relationship in Seattle. They have weekly video calls with me, and I get to see how they're slowly, carefully, building a bond. It's not always easy. There are awkward moments, and the grief over lost time is a shadow that still follows them, but the love is there, growing stronger every day. My grandson arrived unexpectedly on a Tuesday, a complete stranger on my doorstep. What happened in the days that followed, the seismic shift in our family's story, still feels unreal. It was a reminder that life's greatest surprises often come wrapped in pain and confusion, but that within that chaos, miracles can bloom. The empty space in my heart that Frank left, and the space I didn't even know was reserved for a grandchild, is no longer empty. It's filled with a love I never expected, a connection I thought was lost forever, and a story that, even now, feels more like a dream than reality.